Welcome to the Collab. I'm Caroline Collins. Today we're talking about honing in on relationships. I'm joined by psychotherapist, connection expert, writer, speaker, and host of the Redhead Reveal podcast, Jen Pinkerton.
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming on the Collab.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, I'm excited to learn today because I think a lot of people have questions about the relationships they're in and they don't know where to turn to get any type of advice. So first of all, you're a psychotherapist, so what exactly do you do and how does it relate to relationships?
Well, a lot of people seek help with relationships. They realize that they're not having ones that thrive, or they're having these repeated patterns that you see the same thing over and over again, and they recognize they might need a little bit of help to figure that out. And most of the time, it has to do with us a little more than it has to do with the other person. So that's probably the main reason that people seek a little bit of help when it comes to dating and relationships.
But you're putting this help out there. Okay,
Yes.
but first the people need to realize, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here, maybe I need to do some work, and then they need to connect with you?
Absolutely. I have everything to offer, from being able to do one-on-one therapy. Also, we have classes and courses and different things like that. And on our podcast, we talk a lot about relationships as well.
Okay, so if somebody's watching right now and you're in a relationship or have been in relationships, but it's like the same thing is happening over and over again, can you give me some red flags that if someone's watching that they should be like, oh, okay, maybe I need to connect with Jen?
If you feel like you are the common denominator, if you see I have this same relationship but just with a different person every time, that's time you might need to do some inventory of what's really going on and what are you putting out there. You know, what is your attachment style? Do you even have any boundaries? Those are some big questions to really understand about yourself so that you can build this relationship that's healthy and where you're going to thrive.
So when someone comes to you, is it an individual or is it couples?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. You know, a lot of people find that maybe they've been in some relationships that haven't worked, and so they want to do that investigative work to figure out what the reason might be. And some people are in a relationship, but they're just not feeling as though it's going anywhere, and want to understand about that too.
So what is the thing that you see the most that's holding people back in successful relationships?
One of the biggest things, well, two-part really, but one of them would be not having any self-love and self-compassion. You know, if we don't learn how to love ourselves first and we don't find that happiness within, we can't put that out with someone else. We're not going to be able to create this relationship that's healthy and that feels good if we don't have our own self-love and self-compassion. We also can't build healthy boundaries without that. So that's one part. Another piece of it is our own internal work. If we have some work to do, some attachment wounds, some trauma we haven't resolved, that 100% shows up in relationships.
And to be clear, we're talking about romantic relationships
100%,
here, right?
yes.
I know, and that can be a tough one, and it doesn't even matter what age you are. I feel like people are kind of stuck in the same patterns, and oh man, it's just the same thing over and over. You hear it all the time, right? You sit down with a girlfriend for drinks. It's like, well, that guy, this guy, is dating him. Well, same thing. So what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing that people are coming to you with?
I think people sometimes don't know what they want also. They have this idea of this is my checklist, this is what I'm looking for, but they really haven't recognized why did they like that? Because that's the big part. Understanding why you want that. Why are you attracted to that? And when we start to figure out that why, then maybe we recognize, I don't really know if that is the healthiest thing I should be looking for.
Absolutely.
And so you can pivot, you can really transform and start looking for something very different. And when we work on that ourselves, then we attract something different in partners.
So when people do get in contact with you, and I know you have a whole office in Houston.
Yes.
Are you working with people in person? I know you have online things.
Oh.
Like, how does that work?
A lot of people love virtual, and it is convenient, and that's certainly accessible for people. And some people prefer coming in the office. We also offer intensives and workshops and other things as well. So it's really particular to what somebody's looking for.
So you could maybe even start with one of your online courses.
For sure.
Okay.
I have a course called To Do Before I Do, and it basically is a course that you understand how to have the framework for a healthy foundation. It goes over trust and transparency and secrecy versus privacy and things that, people may not really talk about in the beginning, but you absolutely should.
So why is it so important to have trust and to not be sneaking around and hiding your phone? And how do you even get to that point? Because I think people build up such a habit of secrecy, even if they're not even doing anything that needs to be hidden. It's like this thing, like my phone, don't look at my texts.
Right, but why don't you want someone to look at your phone? It's more about you every time. I wish I could say, hey, let's point the finger at somebody else, but it's almost always about us. What we're attracting, what our own behaviors are, what is normal to us. What were the primary love lessons we learned growing up that was modeled for us about relationships? What are the subconscious messages that we got about what our worth is and what we deserve? And so those things are really imperative to understand so that you can be in a relationship understanding this is what I need, this is what's healthy, and this is what is not.
Does anybody ever come to you and just say, like, how do you know if you're with the right person? Like, you know, I'm with this person, it's great, but in my own mind, like, what if I just don't, what if I'm not certain? How do you work through that?
The first question I would say is, how do you feel in your body? Does this person make you feel anxious? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Do you feel hypervigilant? Do you feel excited? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel calm? I think there's so much understanding to be done in how we actually feel in our body with somebody, because our body knows a little bit more than our head and mind really wants to acknowledge sometimes. And so I think that's one of the first cues about whether this relationship is good for me.
People who are in relationships, are we talking, they come to you, are they, or sometimes they married and they're just like not fulfilled, or like who are you seeing?
I think it runs on a full axis. There are people who are in a relationship for a long time and maybe they feel like they don't have any more connection or intimacy, or maybe they feel like we're just bored. Also, you have people that are newly dating and realize, I don't know if this is going somewhere, but I hate to have yet another relationship that doesn't work. I think there's so many different reasons, but the main thing is that if you're out there and you don't feel as though you're happy and fulfilled and thriving, and I choose that word for that reason because I think it's such a defining factor to really hit a lot of points. Do you feel like you're thriving in this relationship? And if you're not, then maybe you want to explore why.
Wow. Okay, so growing up, my mom just ingrained in my head, don't settle. Don't settle, don't settle. Like, you know, just keep dating until you find a person that, I think her message was like, that you feel is like equal or is successful to you. You know what I mean? What about not settling? Because I hear that on social media now a lot, like don't settle. So I know it's like a message that our moms and other people say.
Sure, and I think those are the very best interests at heart in saying that. However, that being said, yes, you want to know your worth. You want to make certain that you're not going to be with someone that you feel like does not fulfill you and maybe doesn't have the same goals and values that you do. But we also don't want to just have the ick about somebody way too soon and not really realize that maybe there's some growth there. Maybe there's some opportunity there. And what is it in us that is immediately discounting someone? So while I agree with what your mom said, I also think you have to look at the bigger picture with that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. For sure. I have a pretty good guy right now. So I'm pretty happy with, and I think my mom really likes him. So I think we're good on that one.
A seal of approval.
Yes, I do. But I feel like she's always like, at the end of the day, liked everyone, but she would sometimes be like, you know, life with that person would be, you know, like this, or life with that person would be like that. So I appreciate her trying to warn me, because like, I don't know, sometimes you're just so ingrained in your relationship, like you're really blinded to what actually might be going on. Do you find that with people you talk to?
Absolutely. And people sometimes just don't want to go with what the fear of the unknown is. So they might stay in a relationship longer than they should because they're too scared to understand what else is out there. You know, so much of this comes from, what do we think about ourselves? And how do we feel about ourselves? And what do we want to put out there? What are we looking for? And understanding those red and green flags, because a lot of people miss those.
So if somebody maybe has gotten out of a relationship, maybe somebody's been single for a really long time, I mean, what is that one thing that's keeping them, or it's probably not one thing, but what could be some of the things that are keeping them from finding a partner that they actually enjoy and feel happy about?
Again, it's not one thing,
right?
But I think a big thing would be, have you done some inventory to decide what do you really want in someone? What are you looking for? And then are you showing up in an authentic way? Are you being vulnerable with people that you're dating? Are you willing to let them in to see what happens? Because a lot of people get really scared about vulnerability, but it's a ladder to connection. If we can't be vulnerable with someone, we are never going to get to that place of really knowing them. And we're never going to get to a place of feeling that we're truly connected. So it's a bridge that you have to really think about, going through all those steps to get to that place.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like people might be like, but where do I start? But this is exercises that you work through in your courses.
Absolutely, yes. If you buy the course, you get a really good understanding of where it starts. You know, how our beginnings were started. What do we learn and what are we looking for, and why does that relate to our own attachment wounds? And that's really important.
Yeah, because all these questions and points that you're bringing up would be difficult for somebody to just like sit down and ask themselves these questions. Like you almost need a session with you or a guided practice to really sit down and think about, okay, what's happening here.
Absolutely.
And be able to put the blame on yourself. And that can be hard.
It is. It's scary. It's scary to look inward. It's so much easier to point the finger at somebody else. But if it's about us and it's our life and it's our future, don't we want to take a little bit of investment into looking at ourselves, into being more willing to be accountable for anything that we're bringing to the table?
It's almost like being self-aware, I feel, in a way.
Absolutely. Self-awareness and self-compassion, those are so jointly tied together. We have to be willing to say, hey, I don't really like what I'm doing here, but I'm going to recognize that I can change that and I can shift and pivot, and then it's going to look very different.
Well, through podcasts, and I know you have the podcast,
Yes.
do you talk about this stuff in
Absolutely.
your podcast?
Relationships is one of the core things we talk about.
Okay.
Connection is kind of my focus. So anything that has to do with how we are connecting with other people is 100% really something that we drive home.
I feel like listening to podcasts about relationships and just being self-aware and really getting to know yourself has definitely helped me grow out of my 20s and into my 30s. And sometimes I look back to my 20s and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I was such a know-it-all in that relationship and I was kind of bossy, and I do have a strong personality, so I'm not surprised. But I also found, like, in certain relationships that I was in, that kind of like the more that I just like didn't care and wasn't like, you have to wear that and don't do that, like those people would actually like start doing what I wanted them to do anyway, because I wasn't like barking at them.
Right. So what is the energy that you were putting out? And why were you putting that out? Was that self-protection?
Yeah.
Was that you wanted to either self-sabotage it, or were you just trying to make certain this person could step up? You know, we understand why we do those things. And energy is huge, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, the difference between I want to be very, like you're saying, a strong personality. I'm going to say what I want up front versus maybe I'm going to be a little more relaxed. You know, what does that look like to the other person?
I kind of shifted from being like, my family, we all dress up for occasions. So like if it's Christmas Eve, you don't wear jeans, and we always dress up for church. So I'd be like, well, you have to wear, you know, you have to wear khakis or black pants and a tie. And then I finally just kind of changed to like, oh, wear what you want, but I'll be in my dress. You know how my family is. And it was like, boom, they would show up like looking like $1 million. I was like,
well, that's
is
actually
that
that's a little bit of reverse psychology there you were working with. So,
well, I just think that, like, you know, the less that you like try to change someone and the more you work on yourself, I feel like that might have been an extreme example, but the more that I, you know, was like, look, like, you know, I may be this way, but this person might not. They kind of like, they want to make you happy a lot of times.
True, and no one really wants to be controlled. And it feels a lot better for someone to say, hey, this is what I'm doing, but I'm going to respect you doing whatever you want.
Totally.
There's an incentive there. They have an impetus to say, well, I want to meet her needs. Rather than if you're telling them what to do, they're like, yeah, no thanks.
I know. But needless to say, those relationships didn't work out. So it was
All
for the best anyway. Yeah, but I just do feel like it's sort of like, you know, once you kind of start even just doing a little bit of work, like listening to podcasts like yours and self-reflecting, you really can, you come to some realizations that you're like, oh, I didn't know I was even like that. You know, people
It
aren't
usually
aware.
does work just like that too, where you had this epiphany to say, wow, I did not realize that I was doing this, or I didn't recognize that my behaviors were because of this.
Right. And, you know, it's like, do you feel like a lot of people, when they come to you with like relationship problems, do you find that it's like a pattern that they're repeating from their own parents or anything?
Absolutely.
Really?
I mean, that's the attachment wound part. You know, we understand when we're growing up now, if you didn't feel like you were heard, then you're going to want to be heard in a relationship. Or if you grew up in a household that had a lot of chaos, then you might be subconsciously trying to seek that chaos out in a relationship. So something too peaceful and too healthy doesn't feel good to you, and so you avoid it. But something that's volatile and has a lot of ups and downs feels like home.
Oh my gosh, that just hit so hard. that was my 20s. That I feel like that, like, I loved the drama and now I'm in like the most steady, calm, like amazing, fulfilling relationship instead of like this big, huge, dramatic ups and downs all the time.
And I would challenge that you can probably do that now because you had some time for some growth. You did some reflection and you understood, hey, this actually feels good to me now. And so we can do that. We all have the ability to change and grow and pivot. And I think that's part of life and part of adulting and growing
Yeah.
up. But if we don't ever work on that, then I think we're left, being unhappy in a
Totally.
relationship.
Well, I think too, part of me, like I said, I have, a big personality. That doesn't sit well with everyone, and you're just not meant to be with that person.
Right,
Maybe
but
you just don't vibe. I
If you're
don't know.
too much, then they need to probably go find less.
Yes,
you know?
thank you. Love that. Yeah, and it's funny because now I feel like I talk about my boyfriend a lot on these shows, but it's like that's what
good
we're
for
talking
him.
about. Yeah, he's just so he just loves me for me and just accepts the big personality, and it's never like an issue.
But you are the right, whether it's big or little, for the right person. That's a perfect illustration of you found someone that's at peace with that. They accept you. There's acceptance. And acceptance is so fundamental in a relationship.
So in any relationship, unfortunately, there's always going to be, whether in a good relationship or a bad relationship, conflict, fighting.
Yes. But conflict is not a bad thing. We have this idea that if you're fighting, that there's a problem. Conflict is inevitable. We can't avoid it. We are not robots. We're unique human beings. We're going to disagree on things. But to understand how to have healthy conflict, to understand how to fight fair, to have some basic rules and some structure to understand this is what we do and this is what we don't do. That is right there to understand and learn and adopt, and it will absolutely change the way you look at conflict. It shouldn't be something scary.
Right. I know, because depending on what relationship you're coming from, you might run into a problem and you're expecting this new person to come out swinging, and then they're just so calm and want to talk about it, and it's wow.
Well, I often tell people, especially young, either teens or people in college, if you're just starting to date, one of the best indicators of somebody's emotional growth or maybe emotional health might be, how do they act when they're angry?
Oh, wow.
Are they able to be emotionally regulated? Or do they maybe do some things or have some, mechanisms there that are really unhealthy? Do they criticize you? Do they put you down? Is there a lot of volatility? Those are big red flags to look for, because being emotionally regulated, that's something we either know because we grew up in an environment that was customary, or we can shift because we didn't. Maybe we do that because that's what we were taught, but everybody can learn how to be emotionally regulated, and then how to have a conversation about conflict that just comes with working it out and listening to your partner and being vulnerable and having that validation that's so important, so that you feel like your needs are being met.
I love what you said though, if you're with a partner that's putting you down, and I feel through your 20s, it's just the most craziest experience as you're dating, and you're dating all the different people, and you're you want to be in a relationship in your 20s because it's fun, so you're dating all these people, you're trying to find the right one. And I really am so happy and thankful that I had my self-confidence and love for myself to an extent, because I think that helped me through what could have been some not so good relationships, or maybe comments from guys here and there that were ignorant or rude, or just maybe knocking me down. But because I had I call it self-confidence, but I guess it could be self-love. I was that's not going to affect me, and that was rude,
But I'm glad that you had that, because a lot of people are missing that.
Right. So,
and they don't feel like they can have a voice. And that's what I'm talking about. Were you seen and heard growing up? Could you state what you were feeling? And was that emotionally safe to do so growing up? Because if it wasn't, pretty highly likely that you're not going to feel safe to do that in a relationship either.
But I think people would be well, how do I even start loving myself? What is the first step to even gain self-love? Because some people might be in a really bad place.
I think you do have to go back a little bit. You have to understand why you are the way you are. What are the things that influenced you? You have to start slowing down. You have to understand how your body feels, how our nervous system feels. When are we at peace? What is it that makes us feel at peace? And doing some of that work to get to a place where you feel, okay, now I feel safe to explore these concepts and thoughts. And a lot of people really do need to go to therapy to deal with things if it is something that, they really are recognizing it's problematic. But that is something that anybody can go through that healing journey and come out on the other side and feel so much better. It's like that temporary discomfort for then having a very different outlook in a relationship afterwards.
Luckily, I do feel if anybody listens to any type of, I don't want to call them self-help, but just wellness podcasts now, they always talk about therapy and the importance of therapy. And I feel this is a good route as to why therapy might be a good option for some people, because you have to get to the bottom of what you're experiencing to then open yourself up to be in a relationship.
That's right. We so easily just think it's the other person, like I was talking about, and usually it's not. And when we can understand what we bring to the table and what it's about for us and what we know, what we maybe need to unlearn that we have learned, and adopt new tools, and then we can look at things very differently, and we show up differently. I talk often about how we show up, because that's really the root. I mean, what are you putting out to someone you're dating? What are they putting out to you? It's that showing up that is the key indicator about what's going on inside.
Yeah, and it's so nice to be in a relationship where there is peace and calmness. I think that that's so huge, because I feel like the whole up and down and roller coaster and drama, like, sure, that can be fun for a stint of time in your 20s, like young 20s, but it gets so old and it really wears on you and becomes so draining.
Well, it's unhealthy, and that wearing down is your body telling you this doesn't work for me. This is overwhelming me and exceeding my ability to cope with it.
Yeah.
And that's the message that your body was telling you. This isn't good for me.
How crazy.
You know, and chaos is never going to be good in a relationship. And if you are having that, and you have a relationship where that is a cornerstone of it, you probably have to really start looking at that differently.
Oh man, this is like such a wake-up call for people, I feel. So how can they get connected with you? You are here in Houston.
Yes. Yeah, so jenpinkerton.com is my website, and I offer therapy, I offer intensives, I do different sorts of workshops, a lot of coaching, the podcast, there's so many different ways, and of course the course. I mean, I think purchasing that course makes a really big difference, and you having an understanding of at least the framework of what's going to be healthy or not.
What's the course called again?
To Do Before I Do.
And how long does this course take somebody to get through?
It's a little bit different for each person. It depends on, there's homework assignments, there's some reflection in there, so it depends on the individual person. But I think that you can certainly, if you're with someone in a couple in a relationship, you could do this on date nights, you could do this on a weekly basis, you could probably knock it out in a week. It depends on how quickly you move through it and whether you're getting stuck with something. There may be a part of that really resonates with you and you're stuck and you think, wow, we need to do some work on this. Or you might really breeze through a lot of sections of it feeling as though, no, I've got this part's good. So I think it really is an individual thing to see how long it might take you to go through it. But the beauty of it is you can go back and repeat parts of it that really you need to. You can maybe breeze through some parts that aren't as relevant to you.
Well, what do you say to people who might just feel awkward talking about something like this with their partner?
Well, if you can't talk about your relationship, I'm not sure why you're in one. I think you have to really recognize that is a base idea of we're not going to get any growth if we can't even talk. And you could be having all the fun in the world, you can have all the chemistry in the world, but if you can't have the heavy conversations, the conversations that actually have some substance and mean something, then your relationship probably isn't really headed for a lot of success.
And one thing that I found just like through my dating experience is a lot of times when I would meet somebody, it would be like when I'm out at a bar having fun, and then you kind of continue to do that for like the first couple dates or whatever. Like, oh yeah, we're going here, meet up here, and it's like all this energy and fun. But like that's not how I live my day-to-day life. Like my day-to-day life is pretty structured, and I work really hard, and I'm not always wanting to go out for cocktails. I work out a lot. So I guess what's the best way to kind of figure out like, oh, we really don't align and I don't want to spend too much time wasted on this person, because it really, at least in my experience, like could depend on where you meet that person. You know what I mean?
Well, I encourage people to be so authentic when you're dating, and don't limit it to one thing. If you met at a bar, great, you're having fun, that's wonderful, but maybe your next date needs to be you're going to the park, or you want to go, for a bike ride, or hey, maybe you like pickleball, or maybe the next date, if you're not really an outdoorsy person, you're going to an art gallery. You're going to do something different. You have to really do things and show the true authentic part of you about what you like to do, so you can actually match with someone who either their interests align with yours, or they're willing to say, great, I want to do that for you and you do this for me. But if you don't see that in the very beginning, then you're going to be stuck. You're going to find yourself 2 months down the road and all you're doing is partying in this relationship, and you don't feel like it has any sort of depth.
Right, and it's not fulfilling. Or like if you decide, like for me, I'm always on like some sort of like workout challenge, and I'm not drinking, or I'm not, gonna go out and do things because I'm like in my yoga workout, eat healthy, high protein era, but that might not if someone like doesn't support that side of you, that like that's not going to work.
Absolutely not. It may be a lot of fun for a short time,
Right.
but then what? Then you're back to the same place you were in the beginning.
Yeah.
So I think that's back to the idea of how authentic are you being? Are you being real? Are you telling someone just what they want to hear? Are you just putting out the best version of you, or are you going to be the real version of you?
Yeah, and I think we all have so many versions of ourselves, you know, like I'm so fun when I do go out, but I'm so dedicated to the gym, and I'm so like then you get news anchor Caroline, you know, it's like all these different versions of yourself. So it can feel a little overwhelming to get to show all those sides
Right.
to one person.
But don't you want somebody who's going to like all those versions?
Yes.
Who's going to be able to understand all that? And if you're not
Yes.
showing that, then how are you going to get that in return?
Exactly. And it's so especially for younger people, and maybe any age, like if you get in the habit of, like if the only time that you're putting energy into meeting somebody, if you are single and you're just going out to the bar, like what are you going to meet?
The same thing.
The same
over
thing.
and over again.
Yeah. So I love that.
And then you wonder, why am I not meeting new people? Well, what are
Totally.
you doing differently?
Oh my gosh, yes.
You know, again, it goes back to looking at ourselves every time, and no one wants that answer. Everyone always wants to say, but he does this or she does
yes.
this. But so oftentimes we really have to have self-reflection. Even people who are in very unhealthy relationships, it's not to say that they're to blame for that, but we have to look and say, why was I attracted to that? And why did I allow that?
Wow.
Because what we tolerate will continue. And so I think that's really important too.
Well, I think all these points are so important. Jen Pinkerton, thank you so much for
Thank
coming on the
you.
collab. Make sure to give her a follow on social media. Go to our website if you need any help in the relationship realm. She is your girl. I had so much fun talking to you.
Me too. This was great.
So eye-opening. I just love this information.
Awesome.
And thanks, friends, for joining us on the collab.